So today I'm working on a unit here and looking like it's got a low charge is what the note said on it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hook gauges up, figure out the pressures, and basically just figure out how they came to that conclusion, because just in the lab at school. So it's just like, let's get this thing turned on and see what's up. So what I'm doing now is I'm checking the fuse and making sure this fuse isn't blown. Hopefully I get continuity on both sides, and I did. Plug it up and let's get it going. Also, I've been thinking about like trying to do this long form video sort of thing, and I'm gonna try to keep this up for as much as I can, but this is kind of a long form thing because you gotta turn everything on, get your gauges on, and check and make sure what you got on this machine. So what I'm working with is a piston distributor. Basically, it's not a TXV, it's a piston. So what that means is I'm gonna be more focused on superheat than subcooling. And to figure that out, gotta hook up and get temperatures of the lines and figure out from there. When you get your gauges, you got to make sure everything's closed on both sides. I've made that mistake a couple times before, and make sure you get gloves on, because whenever you hook up your gauges, you might get a little bit of refrigerant come out, and you don't want to burn your hand with the cold refrigerant. And there's kind of a trick to putting this stuff on. You kind of got to be pretty quick for it. That way you don't lose any. And with the low side, it's a little bit easier, but on the high side, you got to be like really fast. So very rarely you see like a little spurt or something like that. You won't see a little spurt, I guess I'm trying to say here. So I'm hooked up and looking at my pressures. I think I'm gonna show everybody here. Yeah, so it's equal on both sides. And what I'm doing now is I'm purging the valves. And my machine isn't on right now, so it's gonna be equalized pressures. And right now I'm taking the door off of the components on the condensing unit, and I'm gonna check and make sure everything's wired up correctly and like make sure it's pretty neat, because if it's not, then I'll just pretty much neaten it up, line everything up, get everything kind of like organized. And that is a magnetic pan that holds all the screws. And what that's going to do is, it just basically keeps all your screws in one place so you don't knock them over or anything. It's pretty important. I would like to have one of my own, so I'll probably end up investing in that. And in this system was a dual split capacitor. So that's going to be, it's like two capacitors. One is rated for 35 microfarads, and the other one is rated for 5 for the fan. And the 35 is for the compressor. And kicking it back on, let's see what the pressures end up looking like. So with the machine running and cooling the area, it's going up on the high side here, but it's not as up as it needs to be. And if you check your temperatures on the outside, it's about 70. So what that's calling for is like a somewhat higher temperature on the high side. But the problem is that I found out that day recently that if it doesn't have a load to dissipate the heat from the actual condensing unit, the fan isn't going to work as hard because there's nothing to really dissipate. You're in a building, basically. So what I'm doing now is I'm checking my temperatures. And this is kind of crazy because on this actual temperature, what is it? Scale, I guess? I'm not seeing much of a difference on either side. And that is because I was using line 1 on the temperature gauge. I needed to use line 2. So I'll probably end up cutting it and then coming back to that part and showing you what it's actually looking like. So this is the wrong one. This is the wrong probe. Temperature probe, yeah. Now I got the right probe. So what I'm doing now is I'm going to recheck those temperatures on each of those lines, the liquid line and the suction line. And then I'm going to find out my superheat and my subcooling pretty much numbers. And I'm not working with like a digital field piece. I'm working with analog. So therefore I'm going to have to do all the math kind of pretty much in my head. The field pieces are pretty cool. The digital ones are pretty cool because they have like all of that math kind of figured out for you. You don't have to do all of that. And find out that my superheat is, what was it, 5? It was a 73 over, or taken away from, was it, no, it was like 78. Here, let me double check real quick. 65 on the low side. And then let's put it on the high side here. This is about 78. So I had an 84 saturated temperature, or excuse me, saturated liquid line temperature. But we're dealing with superheat, not subcooling on this specific unit. And the fan is supposed to be running at 0.63 amps. So what I'm doing now is I'm checking the amperage on that fan. And because there's not much of a load for it to dissipate, the fan doesn't have to work that hard. So you're just going to put like 0.4 or 5 on there. It's kind of confusing at first, but once I realized like, okay, yeah, there's no real load just because it's already in a climate controlled room. So let's go to the blower motor and check if that's running the right amperage for what that motor is calling for when it's in cooling mode. And I find that it is 7.1, I believe I just saw. Yeah, sometimes these things are kind of tough to see. And let's check that cooling line. Yeah, it's a 5.93, which it's only that lower because the latch is open on the door. Therefore, the blower motor doesn't have to pull much air from the return box. So what I'm doing now is I'm closing this up and seeing if my amperage goes up because I'm closing that latch. And it does. And it ends up going up. I think one of my teachers came in and started talking to me. But that's okay. And that's the thing about school is like, it's really a learning process. This is training. So once I do get out in the field and I'm able to like actually do this confidently with no like real second guessing on my mind here, I'll be good. But at the same time, it's always learning. Everything's always changing. There's refrigerants are always changing. They're going from like lower GWPs. They're going to lower GWPs from the higher ones just because it's like global warming problems and ozone stuff, and it's really messing up the environment. So lately they've been talking about switching to like propane based refrigerant, which is better for the environment. It's a little more flammable, but that's why we're in training here. So we don't actually blow anything up or something crazy like that. Granted, it's not a high enough propane. What is the word here? High enough propane balance, I guess. But what I'm doing now is I'm getting my delta T, which is the temperature of the return air coming in, and then I'm gonna get the temperature of the air coming out of the unit, and subtract the higher from the lower one, and then that should tell me basically the temperature range that I'm getting out of that unit. And it's supposed to be like 15, 20. So that's for comfort cooling at least. And go back to the unit here, and looks like I found our problem a long time ago was the pressure. So since that pressure is not going to be high on the high side, it's not high enough, that's because the heat load restriction. There's really no heat load in that room, so you're not going to get like a real reading. So what I'm doing now is just taking my gauges off. Make sure you be careful with this. Towards the end of the job, a lot of times I'll find myself getting a little lazier with it, but you got to be careful here. Double checking if everything's closed. Took my high side off, put it back on the gauge, and then let's get that low side off. The unit next to me is on at this point of the video, so that's why it's kind of shaking here. And yeah, man, this is really good practice. It's really good experience. But hopefully soon enough, I'll be able to get out into the field. Look at that, nothing coming out there. But eventually, I'll be in the field here, probably sooner than later, and I'll graduate with the HVAR engineer degree or whatever. Next, was it March or April? And then I'll be able to like do a lot more. But right now, I'm just like certified basically. But that's what school's for. It's to get better. So and that's it.